We're live. If you're watching live, that means we're live, right? Yeah. I took down all my Space Ghost stuff because it was starting to curl and look bad. So I got to get new Space Ghost stuff and put it back up because it just didn't look right. So I just ripped it all down in a fit of rage. So there you go. I'm going to sponsor myself here pretty soon, since I'm going to start doing this podcast consulting thing, the Your Pod Guy thing. But I have to finish the website and all that kind of stuff first. And I've got another sponsor, but they're not even communicating with me, so I'm not going to even talk about them. You can listen to them on the podcast, and that's it. Okay, it's some gym. It's boxing stuff. I don't know what it is, but they didn't even send me a sample, so I can't even tell you about it. But it's a gym. It's a boxing thing. I'm um I'm having a day, so between my age and the fact that there's just a lot of noise in the house today, I'm trying to gather my wits about me. So um, bear with me as you always do. You're good people. I appreciate it. But I am stoked to have my guest on today. It's Paul Douglas Moomjean, and I was talking to him before we got on. I was trying to figure out how I found him, and we figured out it's through John Poveromo's show, Dystopia Tonight. But for some reason, I went down this rabbit hole watching his dry bar special and watching all the videos that he has online, and I decided I want to talk to him. And he's got he he's got a lot of insight into comedy that he brings on the stage in a subtle way, and I really want to get into that, so I'm going to bring him up right now. It's Paul Douglas Moomjean. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, 2 o'clock on a Thursday, this is
Yeah.
like the weird. It's like the part of the day where it's kind of like if nothing ever happened for the rest of the day, it's like okay.
Yeah.
It's not
I
like
know how
there's
you
no
feel.
excitement. It's not like Monday where you're like, oh, we have to get all this stuff done by Friday. By
Yeah,
2 o'clock Thursday, you know how your week went.
that's right. That's right. You know how it went, and you
Yeah,
can't save it, so you might as well just coast for the rest of the 2 days. Yeah.
I take my wins, my losses, and then go, hey, we'll start again on Monday.
Yeah. So in my stalking of you, I've noticed a cigar in your mouth quite a few times. I'm a cigar smoker myself, and right after this, my son's coming over to have a smoke with me. So, do you still smoke cigars, or was that something that you did and you don't do any longer?
So last year in July, I had massive heart failure.
Yeah.
And I've lost a bunch of weight since then, and I've had to change dietary and social habits.
Uh-huh.
So cigars now since July of last year, I've had maybe three,
Okay. And that's
but I was having three a night during the
yeah.
pandemic.
So you sound like me. That's where I was, and so I started in the '90s, and the by the time the 2000s rolled around, I had enough cigars in humidors and wine refrigerators that were converted into humidors to last me till I'm like 90. And I smoked a lot. I every night it was, two or three. And then I cut down just on my own. I didn't have a health scare or anything. I cut down, and then my son got old enough to smoke with me. So we would go out in the backyard and have a smoke like every night. So he went to college, and I got totally depressed about it. And I didn't have a cigar for like probably 5 or 6 years, except
Oh,
for I bought some for my daughter's wedding, and I had a couple that night. But and I've still got most of the cigars, and they're just in a tub now because we moved from South Bend down to Huntsville, Alabama, and I decided not to keep humidors because we're downsizing and I don't have room for it. But now, I rarely smoke, but I still have a ton of cigars. So when he asked me to come over for a smoke, I always say yes. And
I
I enjoy it, but man, it was a problem for a while.
well during the like I said during the pandemic, I fell in love again with smoking, and
Uh,
because it's like I the lack of socialization. So I had this nice balcony. So I go out to the balcony and I set up a little station there, and I have my
Mhm.
cocktails and my cigar, and I set up my little phone, and I would watch things and just kind of, smoke outside, and well, it's actually really kind of fun when it's like 46 degrees and you get a big jacket on and you're smoking a cigar. I mean, it's an experience. It's kind of
Yeah.
it's the closest I feel to being manly at the time.
Yeah.
I put on that big jacket and,
I dig it. I dig it.
yeah.
My original reason to start smoking cigars is because Letterman smoked cigars. So that, I always wanted to in the 80s, but I kind of stayed away from it because I quit smoking cigarettes when I was 18 and I didn't want to get back into it. So in the 90s, I finally caved and started smoking them. And then it became a problem, of course. And now it's not a problem anymore. I just have a few. But yeah, it's one of those things. Anything that you do like that can turn into a problem pretty quickly if you let it. And I did.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, no. My eye doctor told me that if I don't stop smoking cigars, I'm going to go blind,
Wow.
because he said it was affecting so much of my health and my heart and everything. And I also had to quit drinking, and so the doctors had told me basically, I never thought of myself as an alcoholic or a smokeaholic. I just thought of myself as a drunk and a very sophisticated person.
Yeah.
You know, and so I was able to quit cold turkey, which,
Hmm.
I was able to prove to my family I wasn't really an alcoholic. You don't quit cold turkey when you're an alcoholic,
No doubt.
right? I go,
Yeah.
but I was drunk and I was a
Yeah.
smoker, and I smoked more than I should. But my doctors were telling me, they're like, you can't do this anymore. You spent your 30s drinking and smoking at a level that was basically a lifetime worth of substance abuse.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay. So I got to live out, which is kind of cool because now I feel better. So
Yeah.
I got to have an entire lifetime in a decade.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that you've already had that, you don't have to worry about doing it again. You can just be healthy now.
Yeah. Oh, and I have the greatest excuse, because when people go, "Oh, you're not drinking or you're not smoking," I go, "Oh, heart disease." They go, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay." Nobody wants you to actively kill yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
People want you to passively kill yourself.
Yeah.
You know, like people are like, "Oh, please drink with us. Let's slowly die together."
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So, as I was watching your comedy, and I watched a little bit more last night, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I see you as somebody who portrays himself on stage as a regular guy who shows that there's no such thing as a regular guy. And I'm thinking of Walt Whitman. We contain multitudes,
Oh
and that's what I get. That there's no such thing as a regular guy. We are all deeper than we show, and we've got deep thoughts. We've got hopes and dreams. We've got all that kind of stuff, and that seems to come out in your comedy. Do you recognize that, or do you do that on purpose, or
So I was an
how am I
English.
getting this?
Well, I I'm a storyteller. You could
Uh-huh.
tell, everything's a story with me. I do very little observational humor. I don't do like, what's the deal with airplane food?
Yeah.
You know, uh, a lot of people do observational or very. I don't do topical.
Hmm.
I don't. I don't. I mean, if I talk about a movie, it's The Little Mermaid. It's something that's 30 years old.
Yeah.
So what I found is that being an English major, I was a college professor.
Hmm.
I learned a long time ago when I was a 20-year-old English student and film student. Um, Everyone has a story. Every single person, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but I run the workshops and the classes at Flappers.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. So I work with newbies all the time,
Hmm.
brand new comics, nice people, accountants, doctors, lawyers, actors. They just want to try comedy for the first time. And I'll ask them, they'll say, "Oh, I'm really boring. I'm just a white guy." They'll
Mhm.
say things like that, and I go, "Tell me about your last girlfriend." Oh, she turned out to be a lesbian.
Mhm.
Oh, well, that's more interesting than just a white guy story. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So I get a lot of people that don't think of their lives as being interesting. And the
Mhm.
truth is, if you're vulnerable, you're interesting.
Right.
And so when I talk about how I had all these jobs that didn't really work out, or when I talk about all these people I try to date age group wise and it doesn't work out, there's a sense of vulnerability. I never present myself as being cool.
Right. Right.
And in the process, people who always tell me they feel like, wow, that's really cool what you did up there. Because I'm not a Marvel superhero. I'm not
Mhm.
Tony Stark. And most comedians are trying to be cool.
Mhm.
And what they don't realize is Richard Pryor, if you go back and break down his bits, he was never trying to be cool.
No. Yeah.
When you look at then you get more Jerry Seinfeld and Jim Gaffigan. They obviously are not traditionally cool.
Mhm.
But what I realized is people just like it when I tell them what's going on in my life because I have a lot of contradictions.
Yeah.
I'm 5'7", 200 pounds, but I hang out with Hooters girls all day.
Uh-huh.
And I'm 40 years old, but I look 29, 30 to most people.
Mhm.
So I have all these contradictions. So people are always kind of curious how I developed into this particular life. I used to be very involved in Christian education, and now I do
Mhm.
this. Like, how
Mhm.
does one do all these things and still maintain who they are? And so that's what I realized is when I just do that, when I talk about that in my stand up, like I have a 26-year-old roommate, and one of the bits that I've been working on is we have nothing in common,
Uh-huh.
and it's like watching a whole different person. It's almost like there's two worlds in one world.
Yeah.
She lives such a different life. She knows where concert tickets for free to like Weezer are, or Green Day, or like I don't even know how to buy a ticket
Uh-huh.
on Ticketmaster. Like
Yeah.
I'm so to get to do all those things and to be able to live that life, I'm very blessed that I live a much more interesting life than I should. And then I get double blessed because I get to share it and get paid for that on stage.
Yeah. So, in thinking about what you could have done with your life, in thinking about, being a teacher, being a professor, and you gave it up to do stand up. Do you what went into that decision? Was it the fact that stand up was where you felt the most comfortable, or what was it?
So when I turned 18, I started coaching high school wrestling.
Mhm.
So the plan was become a high school teacher, head wrestling coach, and eventually probably the athletic director and wrestling coach. Because I've seen that mapped out, right? Like at 18, I saw the pathways.
Mhm.
But a funny thing happened on the way to a regular life, which is parents are awful. I mean, I have a
They
general, no, really, I believe every parent is awful. They don't mean to be awful.
Yeah.
I mean, every parent is an open micer.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
every parent. And it doesn't matter who you are. And even the cool parents are going to neglect so much in their parenting, and the bad parents are going to produce good kids, and there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes you just lay a dud. So, my brother lives with my grandma. He's 38 years old.
Uh-huh.
Okay, he's a wonderful guy, has his own problems. But my mom sometimes is like, "What happened?" I go, "I don't know. Lots of people just don't make it the way we're supposed to make it, right?"
Right. Right.
So, so here's the thing: parents aren't willing to admit that their kid is a dud. So trying to teach duds and then deal with their parents going that this kid's an A student. Your kid picks his nose at 16.
Yeah.
Your your kid can't even do the in-class journal. All right. I got kids with two left feet whose parents think they should get a full scholarship ride to Iowa to wrestle. So the parents drove me out. Like
Mhm.
not like with actual pitchforks,
Yeah.
but I'm a common sense person. I go, I don't want to spend the next 20, 30 years battling with dads
Yeah.
who think their kid is the second coming of everything.
Mhm.
So that got me out of that. And there's no money in the colleges because back in 2008, when I got the master's degree started, there was there were more college positions than there were colleges. I mean,
Mhm.
it was there's a multiverse where I'm making 180,000 right now writing books as a professor. But
Yeah.
then after the crash, all those jobs got taken
Yeah.
and they all got eliminated. And then now it's just adjunct, part-time, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, there's no future there. I have to get a PhD and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I just decided, I always wanted to do stand-up. And so as I was becoming frustrated with teaching in 2015, I said, I'm going to go try this. So I
Mhm.
did an open mic and I got laughs and at Flappers. And it was the audition mic. I didn't know what that meant, but it was the audition mic. And they booked me,
Wow.
which they book everyone. Well,
Uh-huh.
mostly everyone. But I didn't know that. And so it goes back to a real simple thing is I didn't know that everyone gets a shot to, bring 5 friends to a show.
Mhm.
So I did, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do, and I was too stupid to ask questions. So I just called up a bunch of buddies and said, "Hey, I'm doing 5 minutes of stand up at Flappers. You want to come watch me do it?" And they were like, "Sure." And they brought their girlfriends, and then they rebooked me again.
Mhm.
And so I was like, "Oh, I don't know what I did, but whatever I did, I'll do it again." And then I took a class because I was like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. And the class really helped me figure out the idea of what really clearly is setup punch.
Mhm.
And this is, listen, everyone eventually who makes it figures this out without a class or with a class. Okay. But what the class does is it gets you to think in terms of what stand-up comedy should sort of look like and how to develop something that works within your skills.
Mhm.
So classes aren't for everyone because not everybody is academically minded. We at Flappers get a lot of students who happen to be academically minded people who like being told, here's what you should be trying. And then if you don't like it, here's something else you can try.
Yeah.
But they need structure. A lot of open micers, I was a structure guy. A lot of open micers want just 5 minutes to play. They don't
Mhm.
want it structure at all. That wasn't me. And I didn't feel good when I did that. So what the class did is it got me to move faster. I got my dry bar special 2 years into comedy. But because
Wow.
of the pandemic, it took them a long time to
Yeah.
post last November. But
Mhm.
I built out 40 minutes of material that Dry Bar was willing to tape and pay me and put up online and do all that within 2 years. Now, my Dry Bar special is no more better or worse than anybody else's, which I say for a 2 years in, it's a miracle.
Oh, yeah.
2 years in. So, and
Yeah.
then Laughs on Fox put me up a year and a half in.
Mhm.
So, so I was generating material that was TV ready at a very young point. Now, I also happened to be at the time, 33 years old, 34, so 35-ish or whatever those 2 years were. So I'm
Mhm.
writing material as an adult who already has a point of view.
Yeah.
So stand-up comedy, and I was in sixth grade, I was voted funniest kid. I was voted most likely to be a sit-down comedian
Uh-huh.
because I was a terrible athlete. And uh, but I was very funny, and everybody knew that. So by being the class clown, by being the one who's funny, I was a Ted Lasso before Ted Lasso, being that kind of goofy, funny, inspirational guy, stand up came really easy. It just
Mhm.
did. And it doesn't mean I don't bomb half the time. I still bomb all the time, but I bomb less than I would have if I didn't embrace who I was and if I didn't have a little bit of coaching up front saying this is what we. So now I don't need an open mic to see if a bit works. I
Mhm.
know what works for me,
Mhm.
and as long as it falls within that. So you talked about the idea of the everyday guy, the schlub who isn't always just a schlub.
Mhm.
Um, that's on point. The words that I use when I teach my advanced classes is there's a theme in my comedy, which is I win when I lose, and I lose when I win.
Ah.
And the audience only wants that. So I do a bit where I dated a Miss Columbia, which I did, and then she
Mhm.
dumped me for a porn star, which she did.
Mhm.
So the audience loves the fact that the Seth Rogen lookalike got a hot girlfriend, but but thank God we live in a world where the universe went back to normal and she went with the guy she probably should have been with. Because there is no world. Listen, if I walk in to a place and I got a really hot girl, people are looking at like their watches as if like, am I in the right time and place of right? What happened here? Like if I
Yeah.
walk in with women, it's like, oh, he must be the gay best friend. I walk in with one or two, it's kind of like, how did that guy do it? So they people like it that I'm winning, but people also don't want me to end up in a George Clooney fantasy.
Right, right. So,
That's important to my comedy working. If my
yeah.
comedy was I date hot girls and then I dump them for more hot girls, the people would despise me.
Right. Right.
It's not that that's happening. It's just nobody wants to live in. Nobody wants to think. Oh, well, really, you stop it.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
you'd need to take that type of a character over the top and be a character of that character, kind of like what Steve Martin did when,
Wild and
he did
crazy guy.
his thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So that's really what got me into it. Was I always wanted to do it. I studied it as a kid. I used to watch all the Carlin specials,
Mhm.
all the Damon Wayans specials. My grandma used to tape me all the HBO specials, and then I kind of watched it as a kid. I kind of figured out the rhythm a little bit on like voice inflection and stuff like that. So when I told jokes in class, I was getting laughs because I was kind of stealing voice inflection from comedians,
Mhm.
right? And so I kind of
Yeah.
knew little tricks that they didn't realize what were happening. Making faces like
Mhm.
like Jim Gaffigan faces, where you just
Yeah.
cock your head, and they would laugh. And I just studied comedy, and then when I became a comedian, it was okay. What's funny about me?
Mhm.
What could be my unique, mannerisms and stuff that I have, and now we're talking here. So
Yeah. So, with your academic background in mind, how do you approach a bit then? You kind of know what your voice is now. Well, you
yeah.
don't kind of know. You know what your voice is now. You know who you are on stage, and you get a premise. How do you take that from a premise to a bit now?
So what I try to do is I think to myself, okay, whenever I am embarrassed in a situation, whenever I am weirded out in a situation, whenever something feels really, really stupid,
Mhm.
I take that and I begin to form it into a bit. So I'll give you an example. I have a new bit that I'm working on right now in which MTV actually messaged me on Facebook wanting to know if I wanted to be on the show Catfish. So I asked, well, what role? Because I'm thinking if you want me to be the host, sure.
Mhm.
They wanted me to be the guy who's catfishing women.
Ah.
And I said no. Okay. So I go, I have to talk about this on stage. This is hysterical. And it fits in with the win is MTV called. The
Mhm.
loss is that they wanted me to play a creeper.
Mhm.
So this is going to fit. I'm going to get laughs off this. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Within the first time I did it, big laughs, big laughs.
Yeah.
So now I got to think to myself. So I call my buddy up and I go, all right, what's the next show that they would book me on? And he goes, To Catch a Predator. So now the bit expands itself to okay. So we start from truth,
Mhm.
the embarrassment of they think I'm the creepiest guy. That's what they think. They think I'm this creepy guy behind the camera, right behind the computer. But what if their only ideas of me were for like shows, that are just terrible shows? So To Catch a Predator, they're like, hey, we think you'd be great for 16 and pregnant. I'm like, I don't want to get
Mhm.
arrested. Like all of those types of things. So then you start to go, what are the worst shows to ever be asked to be on?
Mhm.
So then I can now expand our conversation into the realm of comedy, into the realm of exaggeration. It's not true
Mhm.
anymore, but it feels true. And because I can say with such authenticity that MTV did reach out to me about Catfish, I now feel emotionally that I could joke, they might as well have called me about, and then I can list all the other terrible shows. Now I have a bit.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I have these other things that I'm working on, and what as it develops, I begin the process of tagging it out once I've mastered the first 2 minutes of it.
Mm.
So, for instance, I have a bit where I talk about I worked at the movie theater, okay, but I worked with all lesbians, and I didn't know they were all lesbians. I asked one of them out,
Mm.
and the joke is she goes, "I don't date boys," and I say, "Well, you're in luck because I'm a man."
Yeah.
That's how the joke ended. That just ended there.
Yeah.
Then over time, I expanded it into what I'm learning about the birds and the bees, and the birds and the
Mm.
birds, and the bees and the bees. See, so
Mhm.
then what I do is I now take something once it's established because it doesn't need to die as long as it feels authentic to you.
Mm.
Then what I'll do is I'll expand it out. So now that 2 minute bit becomes 3.5 minutes. So anybody who's seen it before a year ago now goes, "Oh, I remember this," but then they don't know about the tags that I've added.
Mhm.
So it allows for the experience of the audience that's familiar with me, that sees me at Flappers, that sees me at Jared's Comedy Club, that saw me at the Ice House. They would see the bit evolve every
Mm.
single time they saw me. So everything starts as a kernel, and then I want to grow it out. So
Mhm.
that was the way in which I approach writing: is what's happening to me, how do I feel about it, why, and then expand based on, like, well, what would be the next progression if
Mhm.
this were to go out of hand.
Right. How do you decide if a joke makes it or not? How many times are you gonna throw it out there before you pull it back and put it back in its case?
Well, I think a lot of jokes, here's my take on that one is, not every joke is ready for not every comic is ready for the joke. So
Mhm.
I have a closer that I did for a long time, where I use an Australian accent.
Yeah.
Okay, I was on a job and I used an Australian accent.
I watched that one last night. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
When I first wrote that, it was 7 years ago. It didn't make it into the act until about 4 years later.
Uh-huh.
And the reason is because I wasn't sophisticated or strong enough as a comic to structure that out so that there were setups and punchlines and the act outs were moving the story along,
Uh-huh.
right? So, it started as a dinner party where people, I'd just tell them, "Oh, yeah, I used to use an Australian accent to give, tips at work." And I'd go
Yeah.
into the accent for 5 seconds, everyone would laugh and move on. But with comedy, I was able to start expanding, and I started asking myself, all right, what were the worst places I visited? And who were the worst people to get in front of? And,
Yeah.
what was the most, well, the same thing kind of goes with a joke where I go, if I think a joke is funny, I may say, uh, okay, it's not clicking now, which means I may need to wait 6 months to determine if that's the bit that actually um, would work with a different version of me.
Mhm.
Me, when I first started comedy, was not as confident as I am now. So there were bits that worked when I was shaky that wouldn't work now that I feel way more comfortable and confident on stage.
I I get that. And I, I've been more of a hobbyist, but there's some things that really worked when I first started out that I'm just not going to do anymore because it doesn't fit anymore.
Right.
I've changed my point of view, and it just, even though it's funny and I could do it, it just doesn't work with the rest of the act anymore.
Another thing too is, so when I lost weight, the fat jokes that I was doing no longer worked. So I
Hmm.
now had to do fat jokes from the perspective of someone who feels more the awkwardness of feeling more attractive.
Yeah.
Like that became right. So I can't just do the fat jokes the way I did.
Hmm.
Um, and some jokes I could do and it were stronger because I lost the weight.
Hmm.
Some jokes became stronger. Um, but it's also there's a difference between a 5 minute bit or a 5 minute set and a 40 minute set.
Hmm.
And in 5 minutes, things that I couldn't get away with because there's just only a limited amount of time to know me, I can put that into a longer set because I'm going to need that later in life. When I'm
Hmm.
doing 45 minutes, I can't be choosy because there's only so much. material that I know that had some success.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example. I did a bit about how I used to host pageants, bikini pageants at Hooters.
Mm.
And it sometimes did well, sometimes didn't. It never did bad, but it never
Mm.
did. Sometimes it did great, but very rarely.
Mm.
But then when I'm doing 40, 45 minutes and I need to fill the time and I don't have a great audience for crowd work, like you're like, oh, what do you do for a living? Nothing. I'm like, oh, okay. I gotta find a bit to fill the time a little bit, right?
Mm.
So I can pull that in, but I can pull that in with a very different energy because you've now been introduced to me for 25 minutes.
Mm.
So now when I say to you, by the way, did you guys all know I used to host bikini pageants at Hooters? Sir, please put your tongue back in your mouth. You know,
Yeah.
I can now do that. Whereas in a 5-minute set, it's like, I don't believe you.
Right. Right.
So the jokes that kind of work really well in a 45-minute set.
Uh-huh.
I have a bit right now that I'm working on about my relationship, my friendship with my grandma. That kind of does okay in 5 minutes. It does great in 10 and it kills in 15.
Oh yeah.
Because the more you realize, because if I, this is something I tell comics all the time. If I talk about being friends with my grandma in a 5-minute bit, I become Norman Bates.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
If I talk about being friends with my grandma in a 10-minute bit, I become Albert Brooks in the movie Mother.
Yeah.
But if I talk about hanging out with my grandma in a 15, 20-minute bit, I'm now Brad Brad Pitt who hangs out with his grandma.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's now, wow, Paul's so cool. He spends time with his grandma.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different. Because if I only have 5 minutes, that means I only have 5 minutes to introduce myself to the audience.
Mm.
So if I'm choosing to talk about my grandma for that 5 minutes, I'm creepy.
Yeah.
But if it seems like it's something that's progressing to the point where you're like, this is a guy who sees a lot of movies, this is a guy who does stand up, he has road stories, this is a guy who's got a lot of jobs, and he makes time for family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a more well-rounded person. So that's
Yeah.
what I realized too. A lot of comics make that mistake. They throw a bit out because they never have the opportunity to try it at the 15-minute mark.
Mm.
And so if you get to talk about something after 10 minutes of revealing yourself, it's going to come off way differently than if you only get 5.
Right.
That's another
Yeah.
thing too.
Yeah, and I think that's the first time that's you're like my 130th or 135th person to interview, and that's the first time that's come up that they have to know who you are to understand or really buy into some of the stuff you say.
Right.
So, yeah, that really makes sense. That's kind of a golden nugget for me. Going back to the Australian bit, the accent, and I watched that a couple times, and the beginning part of that where you're first trying the accent, and the guy's like, "Okay, what part of Australia you're from?" And it just keeps getting more uncomfortable, and yet you're leaning into it. So you feel. I can tell you feel bad about lying, about going to medical school, but you still took the $20 instead of the 5. And there was something in there right at that moment is when it really sealed the joke. So you could have done whatever you wanted after that, but that right there is what made the joke real.
When I admit that I'm lying
Hmm.
and that I don't like this and
Hmm.
I need to stop this, then I can lie as much as I want.
Yeah.
It's because if you think about our culture and the way that we see morality,
Hmm.
people go, "Well, I said I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What more do you want me to do?"
Right.
Okay, well, imagine if we all took that as our ethos. We
Hmm.
don't. I mean, we kind of do, but we really don't. I can then say, "Well, I'm sorry for doing this." And then you go, "Oh, well, now you can do it."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a key. Now, here's what's funny. You talked about that as well. I got into an argument with a comedian one time about this, where they were talking about I'm not vulnerable enough because I don't talk about more, I guess more sex stuff, right? That was
Hmm.
their that's and I said, and you picked up on something very interesting. You picked up on the fact that I'm revealing to the audience that I can be a liar.
Mm-hmm.
That to get out of something, to make money, I will lie if I feel that that will help. All right. And I said, as someone who grew up, I told the comic this, as someone who grew up with an evangelical background, um, that is a sense of vulnerability for me to admit
Mm-hmm.
that I lied to make money.
Right.
And so you're right. There is a certain sense of when some comics are getting away with, mistreating their date, when comics joke about mistreating their boss, I my thing is I'm not mistreating women, I'm not mistreating, which can all be fodder for comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lying to people using a fake Australian accent to make money.
Yeah.
So it becomes a different type of vulnerability.
Yeah. And you feel worse about that than some people feel about doing much worse things.
Yes.
And that's the vulnerability that came out. And I was just, it just hit me that, wow, this guy is just really showing him, he's showing everything that he's all about right here. And that part lasted maybe 25 seconds, and this is not even the whole joke. It's right at the beginning. It's pretty much the setup, and yet right there, I pulled you in, and I was pissed off at you for lying, because I was thinking I was the guy that changed my 5 into a 20, but at the same time I'm thinking, yeah, I've done that shit too. So it was really, I don't know why, but that was, out of everything I watched, that joke just really grabbed me.
It's a pretty popular joke when I do it for every Saturday I perform at a club in Santa Clarita. And I had a person come up to me one time. They said, "We brought our friend to have you do the Australian bit. You didn't do it." And I go, I got to do different stuff because people see me every week.
Yeah.
And they're like, "No, but I said, tell you what, here's my email. Tell me when you're gonna come next time. I'll do it next time."
Hmm.
But yeah, no, it's definitely a joke that connects. And it's such a weird story. Like nobody does this. It's very sitcom-y, but it's 100% true.
Hmm.
And so it when, but you know what? My background of watching so much TV and movies, I think, inspired me to do it.
Mm.
Like, couldn't you see Joey from Friends trying an accent to get, you know what I mean, like to get
Oh
a job?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, you be it's a very George Costanza thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, if I was in the Seinfeld pitch room, I would have pitched that. George uses an Australian accent to
Uh-huh.
get a marketing job, and he has to walk around all day with this terrible Australian accent,
Yeah.
which, because it's New York, or in my case Los Angeles, nobody would have known what a real Australian sounds like.
Right.
Well, the way that the story in real life goes is we had an Australian comic come to Flappers. She took some classes, and I did the Australian accent for her, and she was like, "You don't sound Australian at all. You sound like you're from New Zealand with a hint of Down syndrome." So, which of course I have the other bit I do in the Dry Bar special about the comment, "Does this guy have Down syndrome?"
Yeah.
So, so I would say that when I'm vulnerable and when I'm doing, that's when the bit connects. That's when I can do it, and then I have to kind of let it run its course and take it away for a little bit, and then
Mm.
get excited about it again
Yeah.
to work. Because I think a lot of times I see these poor comics who they got to do 45 minutes every night, 5 nights a week, 4 nights a week, and they don't have time to write new stuff. They don't have time to play on stage. They're getting paid to kill, and
Mm.
so I maybe not the audience, but I can see when they're finally kind of like they hate telling this bit.
Right.
They're just getting annoyed with it. But the
Yeah.
audience doesn't know that. But you, as the comic, knows that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of a curse of being in comedy and watching other comics, is you're you're always overanalyzing everything, and it's hard for you to just sit back and laugh, just dig the jokes. um so in teaching, and I know that a lot of these folks are just coming in because they want to get better at public speaking, and they want to you know inject some fun into their lives and stuff like that. But for you how does teaching affect the way that you approach your own comedy?
Well, it keeps me accountable.
Mhm.
You know, I when I started, we had one or two instructors at the school who's kind of stopped doing stand up.
Mhm.
So they left, but I made it a rule that you have to be actively getting up. And you need to be getting up and you need to be getting, I said, even if that's open mics as an instructor, because you maybe just don't have time right now. But I said, if you got to stay, you got to be up. So if I hire an instructor, it's to make sure that, that they're actively out there.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. It keeps me very motivated. The other thing is it reminds me of the mistakes I can make if I rely just on persona. You know,
Mhm.
it's funny. I feel like. So, are you familiar with Richard Jenny?
Oh yeah, I
I
love
feel
the
like
platypus.
a lot of times you watch a 30-year-old comic coming in. They're really not telling jokes. They're just kind of doing a Richard Jenny impression.
Mhm.
And so they got the jacket. They're kind of up there and they're kind of like, "Hey, you ever notice that when dogs get together, they sniff each other's butts?" That's not really a joke.
Yeah.
That's just kind of, but they're doing it with this kind of club comic Richard Jenny Tahoe vibe.
Mhm.
And so, and you can still get booked on that.
Oh
You
yeah.
can still get laughs on some of it. It's not anything that anyone's talking about afterwards, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Nobody can make money off you. No one's asking for your sitcom.
Mhm.
Right? No one's asking to make money off you, but you can get 5-minute guest sets here and there. You can, still do a little thing of comedy, but it reminds me that I have to have clear punchlines.
Mhm.
So when I'm teaching and I'm constant, so if I don't, that means I don't get up that night. So if I have a Monday night class, I don't get up.
Mhm.
I'm at class till 9:30.
Right.
So, and I don't really want to go do a 10 o'clock mic right after that. So what I'll do is I'll go, okay, what can I get out of this with while teaching? And so the students are getting a better teacher because of that, because I'm invested in it in two ways. One, helping them, two, helping myself.
Mhm.
Like, Paul, how would you rework the bit? So I would give them the advice on what I would do for myself, and in the process, my comedy brain and mind keeps churning.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about the persona, and it seems like we're getting into a lot of folks that are trying to be like the new Bill Burr or whatever. They're jumping into a persona that's not necessarily them. But the other thing is you're right. They're working on the persona versus the writing. And it's funny. I had a Canadian comic, Glenn Foster, on a few episodes ago, and I told him, and I don't know if I remember if I said this in the interview or before the interview, that I've been listening to JFL on the Sirius more than like Raw Dog or any of the other stuff. And for some reason I like it more, and I don't know why. And he said, "Well, we're not nearly as famous, so we have to actually write better." And that's really it, because there's some really smart stuff coming from the JFL station, and it really makes sense that when you put the time into the as much time into the writing as the performance part and your voice and your persona, it really shows.
Well, one of the things about Bill Burr that I always use, or Dave Attell, or Dave Chappelle, um, they're performing 9 times out of 10 and killing in front of their fans.
Yeah.
And that's important for young comics to remember, because you go watch Bill Burr, you go watch Dave Attell in front of a group that has no idea who they are, because they're famous, but they're not Jerry Seinfeld,
Yeah.
right? They're not a complete household name, right?
Hmm.
So when they get in front of that group, they can bomb.
Hmm.
They can bomb because the audience doesn't understand why are they talking about women that way.
Yeah.
Like they don't understand.
Right.
So there's still an audience. So when young comics go, I saw Bill Burr kill on his Netflix special with this joke about rape, whatever.
Hmm.
Okay, but that was in front of 20,000 people that have watched everything he's ever done and know that he's not a creepy guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a crucial thing. Jim Gaffigan, you think about Jim Gaffigan, he gets big laughs on jokes that if I just went to an open mic and said, "What's the deal with Hot Pockets?"
Mm-hmm.
No one would laugh.
No.
But Jim Gaffigan, all of a sudden you watch this 6'1", 2, pale guy talking about a food item that no one's ever thought about in their life, and that's the funniest thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people don't always accept the cult of personality, and fan base plays a huge part in the success of certain bits.
Right. And your analogy of 5 minutes versus 10 minutes versus 40 minutes really plays into this, because it's 1 year versus 5 years versus 20 years. And and Carlin did the same thing. I mean, and he changed his point of view 3 times in his career. And he went from the guy with the suit, the hippie, angry old man. And
Yeah.
it was a progression, but people went along with him because he was good at it.
Well, yeah, and also goes back to, you've never seen these guys do less than 30 minutes now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they have the luxury of warming themselves up to do what they do.
Mhm.
Think about George Carlin. The way we see those comics as final products.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
like did you ever see George Carlin when he had a pad of paper at Hermosa Beach working on jokes?
No.
No, only a few hundred people did.
Yeah.
Most people saw Carnegie Hall
Yeah.
taped
Yeah.
with great visuals and a
Mhm.
clear picture and a sound mixer.
Yeah.
And they sweeten the laughs. I mean, I'm the first one to tell people with the Dry Bar special. Oh, I know that they heightened.
Yeah.
They mix it. They make it so that it matches.
Mhm.
Like, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors Hollywood happens when you watch something on television or
Right.
streaming.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's important for young, because comics get discouraged. They're like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'm never going to kill like that." Oh, you could if I put you in a studio.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
We can
could,
make that happen. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if you're generally a funny comic, and you got a nice little 7 minutes, and they put
Mhm.
you on the Laughs on Fox show, a few years ago,
Mhm.
you'd have a great tape.
Yeah.
Even if the set was okay, the tape's going to be
Right.
better than the set.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like CGI but better.
Laugh CGI, I love it.
Yeah. Oh, well, so I've learned a lot today, and I wanna learn some more, because I've got one for you. So I've got a new segment called "Is This Anything?" I'm
Okay.
gonna make a sounder for it one of these days, but for right now, it's just me saying, "Is this anything?" And this is where we each bring, if you brought one, we each bring a premise, a bit, something that we're working on, or we want to work on, or it didn't go as well as we thought, and we give each other some notes. So since you're the guest, if you have a bit, I'm going to let you decide if you want to go first or second, and then we'll just get started.
So are we doing the joke as kind of like if I was on stage doing it for the first time kind of a thing?
Yeah, and I normally just do a read through on mine. I don't do a ton of act outs or anything like that, but yeah, just kind of just kind of like if you were calling your friend and saying, "Hey, do you think this is anything?"
Okay, so recently I just got off a plane. I came from Phoenix to LA, which is an hour flight.
Mhm.
That happened to take 28 hours to make happen. All right, I at 5 p.m. on Sunday, I'm on the plane. The pilot goes, "Attention, everyone. We're going to be taking off in 20 minutes. Go ahead and fasten your seatbelts. And don't worry, we'll be in LA in 1 hour." So I fell asleep and woke up an hour later. And I looked at the guy next to me and I go, "Oh, do we already land?" And he goes, "We haven't even taken off."
Uh,
I said to him, "What happened?" They said, "Well, it turns out there's a mechanical part and the plane doesn't work." So they take us all off the plane and they tell us we have to come back at 7 p.m. That's fine. Then we come back at 7. They say, oh, we have to come back at 8 a.m. And I went to the lady and I said, are there no more planes? Like, can we not find a plane? It's an airport.
Uh-huh.
Like, don't you have a backup plane? You're telling me 40 years of flight and they don't keep a spare plane in one of the hangars? Did Jay Leno take all the space in all the hangars in the Western Hemisphere for his cars? Why can we not fly an hour? An hour. I bet if you put us all in catapults, we can just fly to Los Angeles. We are one state away. We have to go. So they put me up in a hotel called the Sleepy Inn. First off, that's ironic because no one has ever slept there. Okay? They might have been murdered. Might have been raped. Okay? They might have done a drug deal, but I promise you, no one ever slept at the Sleepy Inn. All right? But it took me 2 hours to register because the people in front of me also were members from my plane who happened to be a girls' soccer team of 10-year-olds in which the coaches had to check them all into the computer, but they didn't know their last names. So they go, what's Carolyn? What's Carolyn's name? Carolyn what? Just call her Smith. Yeah, Carolyn Smith. And we got who? We got Lupe Smith. And, oh, they're all cousins. They're all cousins. They're all sisters. All right? So finally I get up there. I swear to you, there were bed bugs in the bed. There were the toilet was so low, it looked like a prison toilet. I felt like this is probably where they put Martha Stewart, like in the same type of setup. Like just nice enough that she wouldn't cry, but really, really crappy. There was no shampoo, just a bar of soap, which made me, again, think I was in prison. And the TV didn't work, and the lights didn't work, and I had to wake up 6 hours later, and none of the plugins worked, so I had to hope to God that my phone didn't die. But then I thought, actually, my bigger fear is that I'm going to die. So that was where that goes. But finally, I get to the airport the next morning. I sit on the plane, and the pilot, they actually said, I can't believe that only half the people came back. I go, what did you think was going to happen? You put them in the Sleepy Inn, but they're probably all murdered. So there you go. That's what I'm planning on doing sometime this week.
I like that, and I'm thinking that you could talk about the Sleepy Inn. Nobody has ever slept there unless it is their eternal sleep, and
right.
That might hit it home. I really like that, and it's a good rant, and it's and I've lived through the same thing, so I know how you feel. And they don't give you big enough vouchers when that happens.
Right. To me, the big complaint is we were an hour flight away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you couldn't just find a plane. Like, and that to me was actually that's where I realized my complaint is that, you know, the taxi place doesn't have any more. They have a taxi waiting, you know.
Yeah.
And then I thought about the what's in all these hangars. And then I remembered at the Burbank airport, Jay Leno owns like half of them.
Right.
So then I thought maybe Jay Leno just owns. So I know that when I set this up, I want to set it up like at the Burbank. I flew out of Burbank where Jay Leno owns half of the hangars. I got to set it up with that to do the callback later.
Right.
So that's, you know, but that was what my head was going through, which is how could there not be any more planes? Like,
right.
and the other part I forgot to mention is that the plane technically moved from Terminal 18A to 23A. So technically we did move.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's that kind of like, no, technically we did fly. We flew on land. So
yeah,
you know, I was like, couldn't we just drive the plane? That's it, right? Can't we just drive the plane? If we just drive the plane, I mean, you know, it's a Sunday before Halloween. How many people are on the road?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love why don't you have a why don't you have a spare plane? It's so obvious that, you know,
and it's also entitled.
Yeah.
Right? There's a certain white male entitlement to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like when we buy TVs, what do you mean you ran out of the TVs? You should have
Yeah.
nothing but televisions here at Best Buy. That's the
Yeah.
entitlement. There should just
Yeah.
be more planes for when this happens. And
Yeah.
but you're trying to get home, so you don't care anymore, right?
Hmm.
That's the other part. I can do the
Yeah.
observation part. Could be like, because when you're in a rush and you just want to go home and you've been on the road for 12 hours already, like reason has left the airport.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, you don't care.
Yeah.
Like if you got to put me on the pilot's back and he runs me home, I'm okay
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you want to put the stewardess on my back, hey, we'll call it a threesome.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what do you
I
got?
love it. And you can really change the tone of that by just how angry you get during that whole rant. I mean, you could really you could turn it up to the point where you're doing a Lewis Black up there, and or you could be very, as a matter of fact, about it too.
Lewis Black is a great example of amping up anger. My favorite is actually John Panette.
Yeah. Yeah.
When John Panette is asking, "How did you run out of food?"
Yeah.
That type. And I met his manager once. He's dead, but I met the manager, and the manager said one time, he goes, "You remind me of John," and I thought that was the most wonderful compliment.
Oh yeah.
But at the time, I was 285, so I wasn't sure what he meant.
Yeah. All right, Paul, I got one here. And this is actually inside of a larger bit. And the reason why I want to do it is because I feel like it is so obvious that it's been done before. But I can't find it. I do all the keyword searches and stuff like that. So I'm just going to throw it out there and see if you've heard it. They call a second job a side hustle now. That's a big win for the capitalist marketing team. I mean, a second job sounds like you're poor, but a side hustle, well, it still sounds like you're poor, but you're having more fun on your second job.
Okay, so to me, a hustle feels like a scam, right? You're hustling something.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. So if anything, the way I would approach it is they call it a side hustle because it's really your job, your main job, hustling you into thinking you have to give more work instead of more pay.
Ah.
So now that's the way Carlin would write.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the American dream is a nightmare. You got to be asleep to believe in it, right? That kind of stuff. So if you think about it in the terms of the second job, I would also want to have the details. What's the first job? What's the second? Because if your first job is I'm a multi-million, I'm the accountant for a multi-million-dollar chain of restaurants, but my second job is I have an OnlyFans.
Yeah.
That's going to be funnier. See,
yeah.
So once you explain what your second hustle, like I work this first job, now the side hustle needs to be an absolutely ridiculous thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So for instance, when teachers, this is a bit that I'd probably be doing if I was still teaching. I have a master's degree. I'm a college professor, but my side hustle would be if I said Uber Eats, because you have to go to college to be able to bring people their mozzarella sticks.
Yeah.
See,
that's my side hustle. That's what the whole joke is about, is doing the food delivery.
Right. So then you would want to mention what it is. You're doing food delivery, but that's not what your goal in life was.
Right.
So whatever Scott wanted to do in life, whatever you like, did you get a college degree?
No.
Okay. So on some level you could be like, how could a guy with no college degree end up working for Uber Eats? See, so that's one way to do it. Now, what's your main job? Is it the podcasting?
No, it's IT related. I'm a consultant.
Right. So I'm an IT consultant, which, by the way, the number one leading job for people with no college degree, right? Because you can learn on your own.
Yeah.
But you still have to deliver pizzas to people.
Yeah.
So the idea is you maybe you start that by explaining to people how we're going to have to use the C++ system to be able to integrate with the SS whatever, and then we're going to be able to do a synergize so that we can get the Wi-Fi across the whole thing. 1 second, I'll be right back. And then you get on the phone, you're like, okay, mozzarella sticks to Cherry Pick Lane. Thank you. So if you show the contrast, where it starts with I'm a very successful person who just doesn't make enough money.
Yeah.
and then you have the side hustle interrupted. Oh, 1 minute, guys, I'm getting a text. It's from Grubhub. I need to deliver 2 extra cheesy pizzas. You think of the dumbest thing you have to order. Now, the next way to write the bid is you're in this IT meeting and they're like, why do you have to do that? And you're like, oh, because guys, you got the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
Like, congratulations. This is what happens when you get the lowest bidder. You get a multitasker. And so now you're working the bit as the consultant, but then like during the middle of the shift, you have to go deliver people their Pepsis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I would be doing, is showing the contrast to this
Yeah.
very high level skilled labor you have to do. And then
I really,
then in
I
the
like
middle of
that.
it, you have to do all of this, but it needs to be the worst foods.
Yeah.
Right? It needs to be like, I have to go pick up 4 boxes of frozen White Castle, to deliver to a couple of 17-year-olds. You get to the door, you open it up, smoke everywhere. It smells like they've been having sex for 2 weeks. And then you get back in your car, you go back to the work to do the IT stuff, and they go, Scott, we didn't want to tell you this, but it smells like you're pretty high right now.
Yeah.
Like, it also smells like you've been with a 17-year-old girl, because my daughter has that same perfume.
Yeah.
So would you mind explaining why on the clock you smell like pot and, Hannah Montana?
Yeah.
So if that's how I would build the bit out, is you take the emotional truth, which is, this is how it feels like what I'm doing. It's not what you're literally doing, but it's how you feel what you're doing.
Yeah. That is really good feedback, because I do have some tags in it, and this was just a piece out of it, because I know that somebody has to have done the comparison of second job to side hustle, and I can't find it.
But here's the way you want to write it: is don't write it from the observational point of view. Write it from the personal point of view.
Yeah.
Because everyone has Tinder jokes, but it's your Tinder joke.
Yeah.
It's your dating joke. It's your marriage joke. It's your kids joke. It's your unique experience. So when you explain that you're going from IT to sending Doritos to people, that's different than my side. So my side hustle is I write political pieces. Like, I don't talk about it. I'm not a political comedian in any way, but I am a deep political thinker. Like, if we were to sit and talk about all the things of politics, I would have an opinion on everything, and it would be very thorough. But I don't want to do that as a comedian, right? Because I do that already. But my side hustle is I literally go from telling people how fat I am to explaining how I would break down the Ukraine-Russian, conflict. And so my side hustle is different than yours. I don't have any kind of layman side hustles. My side hustle still required me to have a master's degree in English or journalism. So that's different. So therefore you want to specify what the side hustle is.
Yeah.
So I am underpaid in 4 different professions for what I'm capable of doing.
Right.
Whereas you're overpaid with the lack of education. And when you take it from that point of view, so here I am with my 3 degrees, and here you are with your none, but you're the one who's the big IT consultant. And I'm the guy who tells, penis jokes.
Yeah.
See, that's where you see, that's what's funny about that. And so if I were you, I would make it very clear that, like, I don't have a formal education. I taught myself how to be a consultant for IT work, but it doesn't pay all the bills.
Right.
So I think that's but once you're more specific, it becomes funnier.
I do have, since we're in it, I do have one tag in it that I told a coworker that that I'm doing this food delivery stuff, and he said, "Man, you must have fallen on some hard times, huh?" And my answer to that is, well, I've pretty much just fallen on times. Isn't this what everybody's going through?
Right. I'm now doing the job that everyone does.
Yeah.
Like, oh, how did you get into doing Uber Eats? I don't know. I went on the internet.
Yeah.
I looked up part-time jobs, and it was either this or just drive for Uber.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
more you exaggerate the experience, the
Mhm.
funnier it'll always be.
Right.
So it's I didn't fall on hard times. I'm literally living everyone's times.
Yeah.
So when it becomes everyone, it's an exaggeration.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, that, I'm definitely going to go back to the drawing board on this one and try to put it together and get a little bit more outrageous with it, and yet
Yeah.
and show it from and I didn't even think about talking about my real job. Uh, I didn't
Nobody
even.
does. That's
Yeah.
that's the problem that every comic has, is that they don't realize you're not a comic.
Yeah.
You're a person who does comedy.
Yeah.
So you bring you to the stage.
Yeah.
Once you tell me you do IT consulting work, I
Mhm.
now see that you see the world from a very methodical way.
Mhm.
You're a scientist. You know what I mean? You're a mathematician.
Right.
You are a man of logic. So anything you do that's illogical now becomes funnier.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like it. I like it. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that. I learned a lot in this particular hour, and I'm really glad we connected.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for having me. If you want to bring me back anytime, please let me know.
For sure. So how can
And
people find you?
the Moom Abides is TheMoomAbides. The Moom Abides on
Uh,
Instagram, TikTok, everything.
okay, cool.
In fact, I
Cool.
think it's now my YouTube handle as well, because YouTube's doing handles now. So
Yeah,
uh,
they threw me one, so that was nice. Yeah.
yeah, so and I just had 2 shorts that popped off at 2,000 plus views over the last 24 hours. So
Cool.
that might be where I go. I get paid for Instagram Reels, but they're so funny with their algorithm. One
Yeah.
thing gets 5,000 hits, the next gets 4, and you're like, you know what?
I have
It's
the
not
same
worth it for
problem.
It's not worth it for a couple $100 a month.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
not. It's too much of a
Yeah,
headache.
I've seen that. That's a whole other discussion. I'd like to get a roundtable of people talking about why social media is ruining comedy, but that's something else. But but
Oh,
thank
it's
you.
true.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been fun.
Oh well, thank you, and we'll talk soon.